You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Good morning and welcome to episode 105 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. And I know I say this every single episode, it seems like, but settle in. Go get some popcorn, get a coffee, get a beer, whatever you want to do. There's going to be a lot of topics we need to discuss. We're obviously going to talk and recap some of those trades, how significant they are. Obviously, I didn't get to talk about the trade deadline because nothing really happened in terms of huge trades. But there were some significant moves, especially for contenders. So I'll be talking about those specifically. And, of course, the Celtics and Lakers. And I'm excited to talk about this game. I'm a man of my word, and whenever we get good games, I get excited because they are few and far between, aren't they? And this game lived up to the hype. Celtics and Lakers always has a lot of prestige whenever I see it on the schedule, even when the teams suck. I always get excited to check it out just because of the rivalry. It's the greatest rivalry in NBA history. It's not even close. And this game had so much leading into it. It really did. And when you think about, forget the rivalry, forget Bird and Magic, forget Wilt and Russell, forget Pierce and Kobe, forget all of that, right? And just think about the recent history. LeBron going to the Lakers. LeBron versus the Celtics was the premier rivalry in the Eastern Conference before he went to LA. So that in of itself makes his prime time. Then, at all the drama with Anthony Davis, the Lakers desperately wanted him. But the Pelicans, and they're right for doing this, they did not want to engage in trade talks with the Lakers, knowing full well that the Celtics could not come to the table unless they brought in Kyrie Irving. Now, I have said on the record, and I stand by this, but I do understand the Celtics not wanting to part ways with Kyrie Irving, but I said, even prior to Kyrie Irving saying, not committing, at least verbally, recently at least, he changes all the time, I had said on the record that I would have included Kyrie Irving in that deal for Anthony Davis. Now that might be a much tougher sell. Of course, the deadline has passed, so it's neither here or there. But the fact of the matter is that these two are not just rivals on the basketball court, they're rivals in terms of getting Anthony Davis. So that was another interesting point to it. Then when you take into account, I'm sure there's rivalries between some of these younger players. Tatum and Kuzma. That has simmered now to who's a better player out of those two. You've also got Ingram. He's a young player, but he's underachieving. Lonzo Ball wasn't playing, and I'll get to that in a minute. But who would have thought, when you added all those pieces, Rajon Rondo would have stolen the show? This was an incredible game by him. And I was so happy for him. You know, Rondo, he's an enigma. There's no other way to put it. He's an absolute enigma. You don't know what you're going to get from this guy. Is it going to be Dallas Mavericks Rondo? Or is it going to be Boston Celtics or New Orleans Pelicans Rondo? And the thing that stood out to me and the thing I'll remember about this game isn't even the game-winning shot. It was the interview afterwards. And I can't remember who was interviewing him, but she asked him at the end of it, she said, what goes through your mind when you come to play in Boston? What's the first thing? She also asked, what's the last thing that's going through your mind right now? And it was a kind of a roundabout interview. But the question, it was a hell of a question too. What's the first thing that comes through your mind? And he said, he looked at dead in light. It looked like he had tears in his eyes. And for people that have never played sport, you don't understand the emotions that come with this stuff, especially if they're sincere. And Rondo looked it dead in the eye and he said, home. And I thought that was good. That was great. That was a great response. We need more of that. We need more of players caring. And I said that her interview was roundabout, so we're actually starting the recap at the end, which is funny. So we're going to follow suit. But the Celtics, they got out to a big lead, and it looked like a bad case of deja vu from what we saw in Indiana. The Celtics were up by 18 points, but man, the 3-point barrage that we saw in the third quarter What did they make? 9 of 11, 8 of 11. I remember seeing the statistic come up. It was incredible. And whenever you shoot that well, it's hard for any team to really compete with you. I don't care who you are and who you're going against. You know, you can throw nearly every other statistic out the window at that point, rebounds and assists or whatever. Unless if you're really making an impact on people pulling up from three the way that they were, man, it's tough. It's really tough. And the Celtics, you know, they held on. They stayed competitive despite that onslaught. But I was very impressed with the way that Kuzma played. And Kuzma, look, I hate the psychoanalysis with sports. I really do. Because it's getting out of control. And I cop this nonsense too. I mean, every single time I post about LeBron or whoever that people don't like me commenting on, whether it's Lonzo Ball, he's another one too. It's an instant accusation of hate, which will also lead to other accusations of racism or whatever. Like nonsense, absolute nonsense. So believe me, I understand that. But when there's notable body language disparities between what we saw early on this season as opposed to what we're seeing now, it's impossible to ignore, especially if you're paying attention to it. Because I do look at body language and things like that to see if a player is confident, to see what kind of rhythm they are in. And that's why if I see somebody's body language and they may have missed their first 5 shots, I'm not surprised if they make their next 11. If their head's still up, if they're still following through and things of that nature, if they have a spring in their step, I'm not surprised by that at all. And that's something that I usually point out when it comes to people like Westbrook or whoever. When they may be in a shooting slump, I'm not worried about them. However, and Rondo's another one of those guys too. He can miss his first 8 or 9 shots and then he'll hit the game winner. And when I say shots, I mean jump shots. I don't mean layups. However, as I said, the Celtics, you know, that they're a tough team. Very talented on the perimeter. I've said this multiple times, especially leading up to the whole Anthony Davis thing, that they need a big man. They need another big man. And the reason why they need it is so they can balance their defense out properly. Because they've got Kyrie Irving on the perimeter, you got Marcus Smart on the perimeter, you got Tatum, you got Brown, you got Terry Rozier, obviously. That's a lot of talent. And all those guys can play defense. So you might be thinking, how the hell did the Lakers get so many clean looks from 3? And if you've never played basketball, if you just look at the box scores and Instagram posts or whatever, then you probably won't get it. But if you've got a big man who can protect the rim, it allows you to play aggressive defense. It allows you to close out a lot quicker and a lot harder than if you don't have one. And the Celtics big man is Al Horford. He's not enough. I like Al Horford a lot, but he's undersized. And he's the only guy right now that plays consistent for them at that position. So without another big man protecting that rim, because what will also happen is if you can get switches onto him so he's actually guarding the ball handler, even though he is more than capable of guarding the ball handler out there on the perimeter, who's going to get those rebounds for you? This is something that every NBA fan should have learnt the importance of, whether they play or not, when Greg Popovich and the Spurs lost to the Miami Heat in 2013. You know, they got stops on both of those 3-pointers, but they didn't get the defensive rebound because they put Tim Duncan on the bench. And this is why I call that the greatest screw-up in sports history from a coaching standpoint. You know, some people point to Belichick and... not Belichick, excuse me, Pete Carroll not running Marshawn Lynch on the 1-yard line. But that was one play. This was 2 plays. Almost identical as well. LeBron shoots a 3, misses it. Chris Bosh gets a rebound, gets it out to LeBron. LeBron hits a 3. Okay. You think you would have learned from that? We've got the stop, but we still need to get the board. You need to get the rebound for this, right? Next play down, guess what happens? LeBron shoots a 3, he misses it. Chris Bosh gets a rebound. This time he gets it out to Ray Allen. Ray Allen hits a 3. Defensive rebounding is maybe the most important thing, the most important element to playing defense. Because you can get all the stops in the world, unless if you get a steal, of course, or force a turnover. But you can get all the stops, you can force all the misses and what. If you're not getting the defensive rebound, it doesn't matter. You're still on defense. The defensive play is not over. And this is why and I'll get to this in a minute because that created some conversation as well. This is why on my all-time starting five, I have great rebounders at every single position. But I will get to that in a minute. So I want to stay on this game. So the Celtics, they were unable to extend out to the perimeter and really close down and shut down those shooters, knowing full well that if they did that, either Al Horford will have to commit, or he was the guy guarding them in the first place. He would have to commit. And then even if you force that miss, you have some big bodies like JaVale McGee or LeBron James or Ingram or Kuzma crashing the glass. Tyson Chandler's another one. He's the one that actually deflected it out to Rondo after Ingram missed it on that final play. So the Celtics, it's funny, we've talked about how the Lakers have needed to make a move. The Celtics, I've been saying this all season, the Celtics have needed to add a big man. They have to balance out that roster because you can't just have great perimeter defenders and nothing on the inside. Well, excuse me, only one defensive piece on the inside, Al Horford. And they better hope, they really better hope, because this may be their only chance at winning the title this year, they better hope that DeAndre Jordan becomes available. Because if he doesn't become available, I don't know who you would add. I know Aaron Baines is scheduled to come back, but is he the answer? I know he does those things. He is a big body. He will get defensive rebounds for you. He will challenge shots. But they're going to... Like, you look at the amount of talent they have, and is he going to be the key for you? I mean, that's a hell of a lot to ask for someone like Aaron Baines. And yes, he has won a title before, but he was never the key. That was on San Antonio, ironically up against LeBron in 2014. But he was never the key to that championship. He's a nice player, don't get me wrong, but if you're relying on him to be the answer inside, that's a dangerous situation. It really is. And when you also look at it with Kyrie Irving, he's pending free agency. I know you got Terry Rozier waiting in the wings, but if they don't get the title this year, and Kyrie Irving bolts, what a missed opportunity. And that's all you really needed to ascend. And it's even worse now when you think of the addition of Marc Gasol in Toronto. But I'll get to that in a minute. I still want to talk about the Lakers. So the Lakers, they responded, but they responded behind Rondo. And I know people are going to talk about LeBron's stat line. I don't care about that. I really don't care about it. Stats are stats. And what I did look at was the body language. I was saying this before with Kuzma. And Kuzma, it was notable. I think he, of all the players, was probably the most betrayed and the most hurt by all these trade rumors, because he's played very well. Keep in mind, nobody expected him to have the rookie season he had, but he's continued that to impress. And quite honestly, had the Lakers had a better record, he should have been an All-Star this year, up there with JaVale McGee, which it's hard to say without laughing, because who would have thought? He was out of the league a couple of years ago. Nobody wanted him. So the point that I'm making, though, is Kuzma, at times, it looked like he didn't even want to make eye contact with LeBron. And I mean, after a made shot, and I think back to that three that put them up by one with 30 seconds to go, or thereabouts. I think it might have been a little bit less. LeBron was wide open in the corner, and I think it was Ingram. Ingram penetrated, dished it to Kuzma. In an ideal situation, you probably make that extra pass. But there's no trust there. And for all this talk, and we'll get to that in a minute, of the us versus them mentality between players and management, LeBron has a perception now that he's a part of management. And isn't it funny how that goes around in that circle? But it was a great win. It was a character-building win. I do think the Lakers will make the playoffs, even though I've called them a train wreck and things like that. Allow me to clarify that. When I said they're a train wreck, it's in terms of what their future is going to be. And yeah, maybe I was a little bit premature to call it a train wreck now, but I didn't think the train wreck would crystallize itself so quickly. I thought with 2 or 3 years we'd start to see this elements of this train wreck. But the younger players are already starting to lose their confidence, with the exception of Kuzma. There's definitely disconnect in the locker room between LeBron and the other players. There's disconnect between LeBron and Luke Walton. And it just... The train wreck is coming along much quicker than I thought it would be. That being said, I still think they will make the playoffs. But hey, I would have absolutely thought they would have made the playoffs regardless of LeBron coming to town. And I said that in a previous episode. Just look at the trajectory that Luke Walton had this team on. He inherited an 18-win team. 27 wins the next year, 30-something, 36, 37, whatever it was, wins last year. They were right there. I fully expected, with or without LeBron, for this team to make the playoffs. So that, to me, is not a great accomplishment. In fact, you could argue that they may make the playoffs in spite of LeBron. And what kind of a good player is that? What type of a great player is that? But we'll get into that as well. But what I want to get into now is some trade recaps. And I got a few comments and emails regarding me not really breaking down why the Tobias Harris deal was so important. Now, apart from the fact that you get a massive talent upgrade if you're the Sixers, how this is important is just to have a look at what we saw last night. Okay, so if you have a lineup, of Joel Embiid, Harris, Butler, Redick, and Ben Simmons. Ironically, the point guard in all this, Ben Simmons, is the weakest shooter out of all of them. Usually the best or second best shooter on the team. He's clearly the fifth worst shooter out of all of those guys. However, his athleticism and ball handling, and you can still get him into the lane with screens or even posting him up. So I wouldn't be too concerned with that. But what you add by adding Harris is another consistent scorer that can really hurt Boston. And I think Philly is more concerned with Boston, especially with what happened in last year's playoffs against them, than they are with Toronto. Now, they may be completely wrong by underestimating what's up north, but Boston does have the championship pedigree, and so does Toronto too, with Kawhi Leonard. But they have the championship pedigree, and they have a team that looked a lot closer to competing for a championship last year with the core that they had. Now, the Raptors core is completely different now too, so I'll grant that as well. But I'm just going by what I think with Philadelphia. I think they are more concerned with Boston than they are in Toronto. So they probably view the Celtics as a bigger threat. So by adding Harris, just keep in mind what we saw last night. Either Al Horford is isolated up against Embiid, or Aaron Baines is isolated up against Embiid, and the lane is wide open, or you're getting offensive rebounds galore, and you have to press up on all those shooters on the perimeter. It creates all those space. So you're able to get Ben Simmons on the glass. You're able to get Jimmy Butler hitting the glass, or Harris on the glass. The only real non-threat to hit the offensive glass might be the best pure shooter in all of basketball right now, outside of Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, and that, of course, being JJ Redick. So that trade is massive from that standpoint, because the pendulum has now swung. Now, leading into that series, the question isn't how is Philadelphia, assuming they meet in the playoffs, of course, but if they are to meet in the playoffs, it's not how Philadelphia is going to overcome the talent in Boston. It's the other way around. How is Boston going to be able to slow down that lineup? And that is massive. Now, I mentioned the Raptors a second ago, and I mentioned the moves that they made. Obviously, they brought in Gasol for Valanciunas and CJ Miles. Now, a couple of reasons why this trade makes all the sense in the world. Now, a lot of people... Let's go back to the Kawhi Leonard trade, for example, to begin with. And a lot of people have said, well, they're really just getting a one-year rental. That's possible. It is possible, but maybe that's all they want. Remember, they locked into a max deal with DeMar DeRozan, right? So by locking into a max deal, and DeMar DeRozan, look, he's a good player. He's a deserved all-star. And with that in mind, he's never got them really close to the NBA Finals, with the exception of 2016 when they won 2 games against the Raptors, against the Cavs in the conference finals. Outside of that, he's been a pretty big playoff underachiever. Everyone criticizes James Harden for that. So let's be honest here and look at DeRozan as well. What was that nickname that I've heard 1,000 times come playoff time? DeFrozen? Something of that nature. I'm not going to go that far, but he does not elevate his game in the playoffs. So if you're the Raptors, you're locked into a big deal with him, but it's obvious that you probably reached your max last year with this team, winning 59 games or whatever, but still not being able to really compete for a championship. And we all saw that in living color in the playoffs against the Cavaliers. And the Cavaliers were not a great team last year. As we saw in the NBA Finals, how monumentally mismatched they were up against a Warriors team that were just pushed to 7 games by a Rockets team. So they were not the juggernauts that we thought they were either. Different story this year potentially, but we will see. So the point that I'm making, I know it's a bit long-winded, but the point that I'm making in all of this is the Raptors probably saw the writing on the wall there that they are not going to win a title with DeRozan leading them. You have to get rid of him. So, okay, you get rid of him and you bring in Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, you would like to keep Kawhi Leonard next season if he chooses to re-sign. However, if he does not choose to re-sign, you have managed to offload that contract of DeMar DeRozan. Marc Gasol, who they just added, yes, he has a sizable contract, but it's only for 1 more year. After next season, he will be an unrestricted free agent. If it is time for them to rebuild, they will be able to move those contracts around that they have now. They won't have to be stuck in limbo waiting for contracts to expire before they can be a free agent player. That being said as well, how many free agents has Toronto ever been able to lure over the border? It's not that many. So from that standpoint, the trade makes all the sense in the world. The other standpoint, and I was talking about how Philly is concerned with Boston, maybe this trade points out that Toronto is more concerned with Philly than anyone else. Because Marc Gasol, if anyone can guard Joel Embiid one-on-one, he's in the top 5. He's right there. You can say Anthony Davis could guard him. There's not a whole lot of other players you could really put in that category of guys that can guard Joel Embiid, match him size for size, as well as the ability to get out on the perimeter. And yet he's one of them. So it's not an automatic double team requirement if he gets the ball in his hands, especially if he's backing down. He has the ability to actually defend him and take those initial bumps, especially if he's posting him up, without collapsing your entire defense. Now, the other side of that too is if you're Boston, we just saw how badly they were exposed on the offensive glass by the Lakers. Marc Gasol is a pretty good offensive rebounder. Throw him into the mix, and now, once again, if these two teams match up in the playoffs, it's not a question of how Toronto is going to be having to stop the talent on Boston. The premier question in all of this is, can Boston overcome that significant weakness? My God, do they need DeAndre Jordan to answer some of those questions. But speaking of Philadelphia, that was not the only trade, the Harris trade. They got rid of Fultz, and I'm happy. I'm happy he's gone. And I don't mean that as a bad way. I'd like to see him get a fresh start. Just think back to Chauncey Billups. And for some of you guys that don't know Chauncey Billups and the story associated with Chauncey Billups, he was a number 3 pick in the draft. I've gone over this previously. I'll do it again quickly. But he was a number 3 pick in the draft. Rick Pitino got him. Rick Pitino did not like him. Rick Pitino wanted only Kentucky guys and veterans on his team. So Rick Pitino, in the middle of Chauncey Billups' rookie season, traded him to Toronto for Kenny Anderson, who was a veteran. Now, Kenny Anderson's not a bad player. In fact, without Kenny Anderson, who would have thought that he would be the guy that actually put them over the edge in terms of getting to the conference finals in 2002? It was his performance down the stretch against the Ben Wallace and Jerry Stackhouse Pistons that really elevated them to upset Detroit in the second round. That being said, we all know what Chauncey Billups ended up being. And it took him a few stops. He went to Denver. Not just when he went to the conference finals later on in his career. He went to Denver first. He was alongside Nick Van Exel, Antonio McDyess, James Posey, Brief LaFrance. But it really wasn't until he went to Minnesota and he was coming off the bench behind Terrell Brandon that he started to find his feet. So it was about 4 or 5 years at least before we started to see Chauncey Billups emerge as the All-Star, the NBA champion, the NBA Finals MVP type of caliber player that he ended up becoming. He should be a Hall of Famer too. Should be an easy selection for him to get in. Now, if you look at Fultz, he has shown nothing, just like Chauncey Billups showed nothing his first 6 months in the NBA. So it's too quick to write them off. Sometimes it's situational. And I think Philly did the right thing for themselves and for Fultz in getting rid of him. They didn't do the right thing by trading for him, because it was obvious that Danny Ainge wanted Tatum. It's obvious that the Lakers wanted Lonzo Ball, but Philly choked. They gave up a couple of lottery picks to move up from 3 to 1. And then, obviously, the Lakers took Ball, and the Celtics ended up with Tatum anyway. It was one of the great trades. Red Auerbach would have been proud of that. So they gave up a lot to get him. It wasn't just a number 1 pick. It was a number 1 pick plus they had to trade up to get to that spot. And what they walk away with is Jonathan Simmons and a future first-round pick. It doesn't sound like much, but at some point you've got to stop throwing good money after bad. And at least what they get with Jonathan Simmons is a tough-nosed two-way player who can defend and he can score. We've seen that in Orlando. We saw that in San Antonio. And you get a future first-round pick. Considering what we have seen from Fultz, that is not too bad. It really isn't. Another trade with a contender was Mirotic going to Milwaukee. They also got rid of Don Maker, who's from my home country, and I like him a lot. But I think Don Maker is too much of an enigma on offense, especially. He's a great shot blocker, by the way, especially for his position. But on offense, he's just too inconsistent. And you can say the same thing about Mirotic too. But he was massive. He was absolutely massive for the Pelicans last year in their playoff run. And I'm not sure if he's going to start now, but we may see a lineup where Giannis is a starting 5 and Mirotic can play the 4. Then you can really stretch out teams. I mean, that's scary. That's a scary proposition. And then how is Marc Gasol or players of that, even Embiid, even Anthony Davis, how are they going to be able to match up with the foot speed of Giannis 15 feet away from the basket? That's going to be interesting. That's going to be really interesting. I like what they've done there. And that trade was essentially for 4 second-round picks, which, as we know, are almost meaningless in the NBA. Another trade was Otto Porter for Parker and Portis to Chicago. So obviously Washington has begun to dump salaries. This is a good deal, obviously. Otto Porter, look, he was originally considered a major bust. He was the 3rd pick in the draft. They thought he was a major bust. Then he showed real good signs, positive signs, when they made the second round up against the Celtics. And when they made the second round up against the Celtics and they lost in 7, people thought he was the key to their future, the Wizards. So much so that the Nets offered him a max deal at the time. And the Wizards, they were stuck. Like, what do you do? Do you let him go? Of course not. They matched the offer. So they matched the offer, but he hasn't lived up to the expectations. But I tend to believe that a lot of that has to do with John Wall. And this is why I do not rate John Wall as a great point guard. He doesn't maximize the talent around him. John Wall is fantastic at running pick and rolls with big men. That's what he's good at. But Potter is an excellent catch and shoot guy that can also create. He needs space. He does not get space when he's playing alongside John Wall. So it'll be very interesting to see what he develops to, given the opportunity, because he's going to get a lot of opportunities in Chicago. Now, also with them dumping salaries, and we're talking about buyouts, Trevor Ariza may become available. Wouldn't that become interesting? What if he goes back to Houston? Is there a rule on... Oh, actually, no, he wasn't. He was traded, wasn't he? I thought he was bought out from Phoenix. I had to catch myself there. So it doesn't even matter. So yeah, if they buy out his contract, if they come to an agreement, he and the Wizards, then what if he goes back to Houston? Wouldn't that be something? I would love to see it happen. And the last trade I want to talk about was Harrison Barnes for Justin Jackson and Zach Randolph. Now, this is significant for two reasons. One of it was LeBron's idiotic Instagram tirade, which I'll get to in a minute, unfortunately. But the other one was Sacramento is not playing around. And I tip my hat to them. That they realize where they're at. They realize that with the moves the Clippers have made, that they will probably drop out. So where is their competition for the 8th spot? It's probably the Lakers. And with everything that's going on with the Pelicans and Anthony Davis, there's questions as to whether Anthony Davis will actually play games now consistently, because the trade deadline has passed without him being traded. So it's down to those two teams, and the Kings are like, okay, let's roll with it. And they picked up Harrison Barnes for virtually nothing, because Zach Randolph has not played one game this season, and he is probably going to get bought out as well by the Mavericks, so he may be another buyout. The buyout situations or period will probably be more exciting, more influential than the trade deadline turned out to be. Now, there are a couple of things that I don't really want to talk about, but I feel compelled to, because once again, when I start getting a lot of messages and people want me to discuss things, then yeah, I'll discuss them. And one of those things was the comments that LeBron put on his Instagram account or whatever. I don't follow the guy, so I had to look it up. But the comments that he left, or he made a post, about Harrison Barnes getting traded mid-game. Now, for the record, yeah, I think that's a bit brutal. It's not a good look. However, he was told, he being Harrison Barnes, he was told prior to the game, there's a good chance you're going to get traded within this game. And he was given the option whether he wanted to play or not. Harrison Barnes said yes. This is according to his agent. Harrison Barnes said yes because he wanted one last chance to play with his teammates in Dallas. I thought that was nice. So Rick Carlisle allowed him to play until the trade was official. Now, obviously, at that point, you've got to take him out, and you cannot play him, because if you're Sacramento, you've just traded pieces for him. First of all, you just can't have him playing when he's under contract for another team. Second of all, even if you could, you wouldn't do it, because what would happen if he got traded? Oh, not traded, excuse me. What would happen if he got injured? So if he got injured, you just couldn't play him. He has to be sat out at that point. Now, but it is brutal. It's a bad timing. I get it. It's not a good look. However, that's the context associated with it. So this led to LeBron going straight to Instagram, which was funny. It was hilarious that he went straight to Instagram, because following the... you can't make this stuff up. Following the loss to Indiana, he advised his teammates to not go on social media. Like, holy shit. Like, whatever. Let's just read out this caption. And then I'll critique it afterwards. So I'll just read it out complete so you get the entire context, and then I'll break it. So let me guess. This is cool because they had to do what was best for the franchise, right? They traded this man while he was literally playing in the game and had zero, in caps, idea. I'm not knocking who traded him, because it's a business and you have to do what you feel what's best. But I just want this narrative to start to get real / change, and not when a player wants to be traded or leaves a franchise that he's a selfish / ungrateful player Sorry, the English is really bad here. The grammar is horrible here. But when they trade you, release, waive, cut, etc., it's best for them! ! I'm okay with both. Honestly, truly am. Just calling a spade, end quote. Now, there's a couple of things there that obviously need to be addressed. As I pointed out, Harrison Barnes was fully aware that he was close to being traded. He was given the option to play and opted to play. This is from the agent. His agent, Harrison Barnes' agent. The other thing is how quickly he is to say, I'm not knocking who traded him, i.e. it's Mark Cuban. Why is he not knocking Mark Cuban, who obviously this is a ruthless decision, as I have acknowledged. It's a ruthless business. It's a business. That's underscore that. Now, why won't he do that? Why is he so willing, he being LeBron James, to call white guys, a bunch of old white guys, by the way, with the NFL, label them as having quote-unquote slave mentalities? Why is he willing to do that, but he's not willing to isolate Mark Cuban, who actually made this decision? This is why I think LeBron is a politician. He lines up in the same aisle as Cuban. Very anti-Trump, very quote-unquote progressive. So he went out of his way, LeBron, to make sure that it was not perceived as a personal jab to Cuban when Cuban made that decision. I don't understand that. I do not get how he can be so vocal against one side. It's not even a side thing, but he can be vocal towards one group, against one group, but excuses what Cuban does. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. The hypocrisy and the contradictions are that it's up there with what you see from politicians. You know, it's okay if my side does it, but if your side does worse, or at best the equivalent, then we're going to publicly criticize you and try to claim that we're better than you or whatever. It's hypocritical. It's an obvious double standard, and I think people are catching on to it. And this is why I've said for years that LeBron is nothing more than a politician. Because the double standards and the contradictions, the borderline delusionment as well, delusional behavior, it's it's head scratching. It really is, and it applies with this too, with the actual sentiment here. Because what does he say here? He says, it's a business and you have to do what you feel is best, but I just want the narrative to start to get real and change, and not when a player wants to be traded. A player can want to be traded all they want. It is not up to a franchise if they are under contract. Like the stupidity of this, the genuine stupidity of this. It is not up to the player once they have signed a contract, unless they have no trade clause, to decide where they go. It sounds brutal, but this happens in business all the time. People get relocated all the time, especially in the United States, especially when you get up into higher echelons of management. They are sent to different branches or different regions to try to fix or elevate those areas of a larger business. This is not unique to the NBA. And those individuals, just like the NBA, they are compensated well for it. Nobody forces them to sign a contract. Nobody forces them to enter the NBA. And if you dare say that this is similar to slavery, you're an idiot. This is nothing, and I'm not just making this up on the top of my head. People, and this is why I didn't want to, but I felt compelled to. People are comparing this to slavery. People are born into slavery, given no rights. This still happens in Northern Africa, by the way. They're giving no rights. They're not treated as humans. And you want to compare NBA players or NFL players to this, who are making hundreds of millions of dollars potentially throughout their career because they signed a contract? They sign a contract and that's it. You know, what's the worst case scenario? They can be in breach of contract, but they're not thrown in jail. If an NBA player decided, that's it, I want out, I don't want to fulfill my obligations as a player, do you think Anthony Davis, if he decides to sit games, is going to be thrown in jail? He may be sued. That is a possibility. It's not a high possibility, but that is a possibility. He may be sued for the value of the contract. At worst, he will be declared bankrupt if he can't pay that, whatever the court would find in that situation. But how dare people bring up slavery to this? This whole mindset of everything is racist, everything is, and if we don't like it, we're going to bring up and invoke slavery is absolute nonsense. And look, if Anthony Davis wanted to go as a free agent, no one would care. He is within his rights to do so. When LeBron left Cleveland for Miami, he was criticized not for leaving, but the way he did it. Have some professionalism. You're a professional NBA player, act professional. It is not that hard of a concept. If my mailman or mail lady, mail woman, whatever you call her, whatever the term is, my male person, there you go. Or, that sounded funny, a male person. But regardless, the person who delivers my mail, if they can have more class and professionalism, because you know what? The doorbell rang at 7 in the morning because they were backed up. So they had to do early deliveries. She apologized. I said, don't worry about it. I don't care. It's fine. I was up anyway. But she apologized. It's common courtesy. If she can do that, why couldn't LeBron have actually reached out to Dan Gilbert prior to going down to South Beach? Why did Dan Gilbert, who had accommodated LeBron in every way that he possibly demanded at that stage, he couldn't even give him a heads up? He had to find out watching the decision on ESPN. I would have been pissed too. I would have been furious at that as well. Would I have gone and written the letter and all that stuff? Probably not. But I would have been furious. To the point that had he wanted to come back to Cleveland, I would have said no. I don't care how much money you bring in. I don't care how much the franchise would be worth with you and your name there. That's irrelevant to me. Principles are principles, and I would not have allowed him back. He does not get to dictate that. That's just me, though. And I don't begrudge Dan Gilbert for bringing him back. It's his choice, it's his team, it's his decision. I totally get that. But the point that I'm making here is LeBron did that as a free agent. Kevin Durant, he gets the criticism because, quite honestly, the NBA got boring when Kevin Durant went to Golden State. And that's probably a big reason why the trade deadline and the off-season and the draft feels a little bit more compelling than the regular season and the early parts of the playoffs. A lot of fans, and they're wrong in this, by the way, because as I said earlier, Houston pushed this Golden State team to 7 games last year. They were on the verge of winning. They were up 3-2 before Chris Paul pulled his hamstring. They would have won that series. I'll go to my grave believing that. They would have won that series had Chris Paul not gotten injured. So they are definitely beatable. But there is a perception amongst a lot of fans out there that Golden State is unbeatable. And I think a lot of that is media-driven. And the reason I say that is LeBron can't beat this team. So what you've got to come up with some excuse if you're going to put him on the pedestal that you're trying to put him on if you're the media. So what's the best excuse you can come up with? They're the greatest team of all time. That's the excuse. I don't buy it for a second. And most NBA historians don't buy it for a second. But the point that I'm making in all of this, Kevin Durant went as a free agent. No one would have cared if he went to Boston. No one would have cared if he went to any other team that would have created a competitive balance in the league. What they got upset and they are still upset about is the fact that he went and essentially killed, in a lot of people's minds, the level of competition in the league. You know, apart from that, there is a bit of backlash when people leave franchises, probably because fans like players. They're humans. The fans are humans, the players are humans. So they're going to build up a bond with them. And the teammates that they played with are also humans. My God, they're going to build up bonds with them too. So yes, a player is well within his rights to leave. However, there is backlash to it. If I get up and leave my wife because I have a better option somewhere, I mean, technically I'm allowed to do that if I choose to. It's still a horrible fucking decision. Because it's a selfish decision. You may not like that, but just own it. It is selfish. And because not everybody's going to like it, and some people actually have the balls to call you out on it, doesn't mean you get to run and be all butthurt and pretend that there's massive contradictions in society. No, if I make a selfish move to benefit, if I'm looking out for my career or my life, and make a decision based purely off that, it is a selfish move. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's exactly what it is. Now, you are entitled to make selfish decisions. We make selfish decisions every single day. That is fine. But at least acknowledge it and own it, rather than crying victim about how bad players are treated. And I think that's what a lot of players don't really realize at this stage of their careers is fans, they don't drive the game, but they drive the NBA. Without the fans, there is no NBA. There'll still be basketball, but the reason that they are making so much money is because of the fans. So the point that I'm making in that is fans are entitled to an opinion too. They don't have to worship the ground that you walk on. It's just that simple. And they may not like that. The players may not like that. But it's the reality of it. And how dare the players get so upset because fans side with ownership when a player signs a fucking contract that people expect them to honor, to be a man of their word and honor that contract. If you don't like that, you know what? Leave the NBA, start your own business, or retire, or do whatever. Then you answer to no one. Simple solution. Leave all that money on the table. Simple solution. You cannot have it both ways. I started this podcast in such a good mood. I really did. I was happy. We finally saw some good games. And, wow. Escalated quickly. Anyway, speaking of games, there are no good ones on tonight, at least on paper. Tomorrow night is, we'll see the Sixers versus the Lakers. That should be interesting. I will be watching that. Predictions for that, probably Philly to win, but, you know, I'm watching it more to see how Harris fits and how long of an adjustment period that will be, more than the actual result of the game. Anyway, guys, have a great weekend. Next week, we've got some guests coming up. Lamont Joyner is coming back on the show. Mike Fry is coming back on the show. But I hope you have a safe weekend. If you're encountering snow or cold weather, which seems to be a recurring theme over here, please drive safe, please be safe, and please be warm. And I'll catch up with you guys soon.